Welcome, Praetors, to the treacherous stars of the 31st millennium, because today we are talking about my personal favorite of the, quote unquote, future historical battles that are in the Horus Heresy series, and that is the Betrayal at Calth. This is a legendary fight within the annals of, the Horus Heresy, and essentially, here's the pitch if you're someone who doesn't know this story. The Ultramarines meet up with their brothers, the Word Bearers, before they realize that war were declared, so to speak, and suffer one of the biggest gotcha surprises in human future history. It's got everything. It's spaceship battles, planetary invasions, a direct assault, crazy rituals, betrayal, all of it. But to get the full grasp of how catastrophic this was and what the scope of what was trying to be accomplished is, because we're talking about an entire legion being essentially wiped off the map was the plan. So to kind of encapsulate all that, we do need a little bit of an introduction regarding the actors upon this stage and the stage itself. Got to talk about Calth. Now, what I'm going to share is actually based on an old Forge World book that's no longer in print, called the Horus Heresy 5 Tempest. It's sort of a campaign book, but it's interesting because it's written like a history book. It's very detached, very, we'll say like a stratospheric view of what's going on. Compiling records and stuff like that. It's obviously biased within, it's someone from the Imperium writing this history, but it's far different than, say, the Black Library novels like No Fear that are set by, point of view perspectives within this tragedy. So they have a very different vibe, even though the overarching bullet points do match up. Which I love, because if you crack open a history book regarding, even something like World War II, which relatively was not that far from us, you can have a history book account which sounds very impersonal, and then you read someone's actual diary or something like that, and it's wildly different. Even if they don't contradict, they just collectively add to each other. And that's exactly what Black Library books or novels meeting this old Forge World book did. Now, I do have one announcement up top for anyone who plays Horus Heresy or 40k. Pop Goes the Monkey is a fantastic store that's been creating bits and alternative sculpts for use in Warhammer and Warhammer-like games. And they are turning 10 this year. And so the owner, Matt, reached out to me and asked for a little bit of help regarding a lore contest he wants to do. I have a dedicated video with all the details, but it's free to enter. It's just a Google form. You write out the lore that you have in mind for your personal, exploration fleet or part of your legion or chapter if you're doing 40k. You can even submit a design of your own to really bring your faction to life on the tabletop. The winner gets a $500 store credit card and are cemented in the lore universe over at Pop Goes the Monkey. He's a wonderful business owner and part of our community, so please go participate in that, and hopefully get yourself a cool army. For those of you who are new to 30k or this particular event that we're talking about, because I don't recall that there are a lot of campaign books on it at the moment in current publication. Who are we talking about, right? For those folks, let's start with the loyalist side of things. They're a fantastic way to kind of bring us into this conversation. Specifically here, the main quote-unquote good guys, the loyalists here, are the Ultramarines. And even back then, they were somewhat treated like the poster boys of what Space Marines can or maybe should be. There are, of course, other legions that can contend for that role, but the Ultramarines, a few defining characteristics is that they are exceptionally numerous, stable, and effective. The same reasons why they're the poster boys of 40k, to be honest. Now, I mentioned it before, but No Fear is a Black Library novel that covers this event from the Ultramarine side, and as we will see, they have a very limited perspective, but they do the best with what they can. This is just my way of articulating it, but I would say that the Ultramarines' superpower, if you would, for lack of a better term, is cohesion. Even though people look at them as very rigid and dogmatic with their ranks and their accolades and all these kinds of things, the truth is that they will defer to experienced people and unify together if the need demands it. This is going to come up like an immense amount later on, but I wanted to drop it here. Now, one thing that is important to this story is how they overlap with their nemesis within this tale. You see, the Ultramarines were used as a tool of censure, we'll call it, against the Word Bearers in the past. We'll go into the details of that in a moment when we talk about the word bearers. But the point is, they're being held as an example of what the Emperor wants his Marines to be like. And something like that can really foster resentment when you use them as the rod when it comes to, punishment or something like that. But here's the thing, friends. That was a long time ago. I am sure that there are no lasting hard feelings. In fact, Horus, dear, sweet brother Horus, has cooked up a little way for these two legions to reconcile. They're going to do what brothers always love to do. They're going orc hunting together, right? That's a fun family activity if you're on a Primarch level. Now, of course, I jest, but Horus at this point had not revealed his treachery. He tells Reboot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, hey, listen, we have an orc infestation brewing. I know that it doesn't really show up on a whole lot of reports or whatever, but trust me, I got the info. I want you and Lorgar, with his word bearers, to go purge those Xenos together. Get out there, quash a threat, form some battle bonds, have some fun. And Guilliman's first thought is, that seems like overkill, right? There's no way that there is an orc infestation that requires the strength of 2 legions. But Horus at this point is a very loyal war master, second to the Emperor himself, and so he follows the orders. I mean, the logic is sound if the mission is to get them to be friends again. Now, it's near the edges of the 500 worlds, like Guilliman's kind of home empire, and so he's allowed to basically select the marshalling point. This is essentially where the word bearers will meet up with the Ultramarines, they'll rearm, refuel, map out the plan, and then kind of start planning the campaign together in earnest. Now, the reason that this is possible is because the planet that he's selected, a world called Calth, is home to one of the most advanced spaceports, like in this section of the Imperium. It's still partially under construction in some places, it's not fully modernized, but it's getting there. The planet side surface itself is a bustling world with room to accommodate these huge military maneuvers, and up suspended in orbit is a spaceport that acts as a dock and a hub for thousands of spacecraft at a time. This thing is massive. It is truly monumental, because it has to be to accommodate the size of the battleships and the cruisers and everything all at once. So that introduces us to one side, right? The Ultramarines are here at Calth. They got there first. I mean, it's part of kind of their little subsystem. They got a lot of ships in tow. But who is instigating all of this, right? Who's our combatant? Well, that's going to be the Word Bearers, another legion, this one led by the Primarch Lorgar Aurelian. A Primarch whose defining feature is that his worldview is largely fixed in a religious lens. After he was instated as the Primarch of his legion, Lorgar went on a tear bringing planets into compliance. But his progress was notably slower compared to those of his brothers. In fact, it got so noticeable that he is going so slow in terms of his conquests that the administration arm of the Imperium, I think it's the Administratum, was like, what's going on over there? What are you guys doing? And it turns out it was taking so long because after the word bearers would subdue a planet, they'd essentially rebuild its religious ideology, tradition, identity in a way that reveres the Emperor as deity. Now, all of that flies directly in the face of the imperial truth, which says there are no gods, there's just science. So this required an action of the Emperor, and for all of that, to prove a point, Lorgar was censured. He and his legion are taken to the city of Monarchia, I believe it is. It's essentially a giant temple city built to revere the Emperor, like the pinnacle of their work. And they had to kneel right in front of it while the Ultramarines stood lined up against them and annihilated the city. So they literally had to kneel in the ashes of the city while it burned. Now, like I said before, that is heavy. That's the act of censure that I talked about with the Ultramarines. And it could definitely imbue a sense of resentment. But this is how the Emperor thought it would be best to teach them a lesson. This moment, unbeknownst to Guilliman, but knowinst to us, who read the Black Library books, is what sent Lorgar careening on the path that would ultimately lead him to the Chaos Gods. He was a man looking for something to worship, and he kept looking until he found it. We fast forward a bit where there's a lot of duplicity and background stuff, and all of a sudden we arrive at this moment. Far off on the other side of the galaxy, the Istvan massacres were just happening. Some of the ships that were there are just now coming to meet up with this party here building up on Calth. But the ripple of this news of betrayal that was about to tear the Imperium apart on fire had not yet reached this place. Part of that has to do with the traitors' ability to manipulate the warp and therefore hamper a lot of communication that the loyalists would have gotten. So the point is, though, the word bearers know all this is about to happen, but the Ultramarines do not. And this was Horus's gift to Lorgar, a shot at vengeance against Guilliman. But, as we will learn throughout the series, there's also a very practical realization to this assault. Right? The idea here, the underlying current is, we need to keep Guilliman away from Terra during the heresy. Right, our forces are Ultramarines and Wordbearers, but the one who set this all up is Horus, and that was his purpose. Keep the Ultramarines away from Terra. And so our two armies begin to meet on the planet of Calth. And now let me set the scene here for you, if you could. Please, go on a journey with me. The majority of the Ultramarines' fleet is docked up in that space station network, refueling. Going up and down from those ships by the thousands are smaller vessels hauling munitions. They're bringing like Titans down from the ships to the surface to be worked on, and vice versa, once they're done getting repairs. Troops are coming down because there's a whole bunch of encampment spaces set up for them on the surface. Everything. On the ground itself, Space Marines are, of course, repairing their weapons and equipment and armor. They're training. And one of the things that Guilliman, who had gotten there early, had set up was this idea that, okay, we're going to put our camps kind of like staggered. So there's a bunch of Ultramarines next to a bunch of Wordbearers and so on. And again, this is an attempt to build camaraderie. Hang out together, have little mandates. You guys go to the shooting range, have a drink, talk war stories. So the Wordbearers are being spread out amongst the Ultramarines here. And it's worth noting at this point that the Wordbearers are not fully here. Where Guilliman's fleet largely arrived in unison, it seems like the Wordbearers are just weirdly trickling in, and they're trickling in from very different directions. There's just a bunch of weird details that they're like, why is this? The main fleet, the one coming with Lorgar, hasn't quite arrived, but there are a bunch of ships here, lots of dudes. And at this point, everyone starts to really believe that the Wordbearers and their auxiliaries, because remember, there's hundreds of thousands of just what we would know as Imperial Guard or Imperial Army troops, just meandering with them, because they all do work too. Everyone starts to notice that all these dudes are super weird. They have different rites, rituals, ways of speaking, ways of thinking about the world. It's much more esoteric and abstract as compared to the Ultramarines, who are very pragmatic. But the thing is, it's awkward. It's like when you get to a family reunion, you want things to go well, and so, you don't press every single time you see something odd. You want to think positively about this other person, and so those little eccentricities, as they might identify them, are being ignored. Wow, you guys are really into tattoos, huh? Cool. Not ever thinking what do those mean? How come you have kill your brother tattooed in Colchizian across your head? Finally, Lorgar's flagship arrives at the edge of the system, and so this campaign can finally get going. We gotta go hunt some orcs. But what's strange about him coming in is that it seems to be ignoring every type of radio hail that there is. But that's definitely Lorgar's ship coming right towards us. Now this story really kicks off at this moment with what is my favorite starter pistol in any of the sci-fi books that I have written. For some reason, this just mentally captivates me. One of the ships who's about to be docked at port is a mid-sized ship called the Campanile. Out of nowhere, for no reason, it fires its engines up to full bore. And it's cruising right towards the Calth space station. In fact, it is so able to rapidly accelerate that it manages to get to half of sub-light speed before making contact. It careens directly into the orbital space platform, and it hits a ton of ships along the way. And the scene is described in a fantastic sort of depiction. It's not like a car crash. It's in space. This ship hits another, and the momentum transfers between those ships into other ones. Fuel lines begin to rupture and twist, and there's fire. thousands of tons of debris are now flying around the atmosphere, and every one of them is functionally a bullet, just because they are all of wild trajectories and, speeds and accelerate, all this stuff. It specifically lists like 5 Ultramarine ships that are just annihilated by this action. One cruiser even falls out of the sky. Basically, it started to fall into orbit, and there just was not enough time for it to fire up its engines to be able to regain altitude, and so it slammed into the planet, which is like a doomsday level attack in its own right. This, the Campanile firing up, is often depicted as like the initial start of the betrayal at Calth. While all of this is happening in orbit, the Mechanicum, who, for the loyalists, are trying to like keep things responsible for keeping the station going, trying to figure out the safest trajectories and stuff. All of those guys go haywire. Like, they're bleeding out their noses, their heads are exploding. And this is for a few reasons. One, all of the cogitators, the computer banks or whatever, that were helping to run this thing were annihilated. Like, the actual impact into the space station just destroyed a lot of its ability to function. So we have too few minds to handle the raw information that's needed to understand and decide what to do next. But also, there was what's called a scrap code attack, meaning there were traitor Mechanicum forces that essentially put a computer virus out there, which was hindering all communications, all computations, everything. It was just like we would have like a psychic assault. This is the same thing on the Mechanicum. And even if the story stopped here, we could all assume that this was some kind of accident or maybe a sabotage, but not necessarily regarding, traitorous legions. The ship just went off on its own, right? Because technically this is still just a crash from the Campanile. But next, all of the word-bearer ships in orbit, the ones who had just arrived, just trickling in from every direction, opened fire. Like full broadside weapon batteries at tilt, in formation, firing upon all the Ultramarine ships. Now at first, Gilliman, over on the bridge of his ship, I think it's McCragg's Honor, has to be like, this is some mistake. Right, maybe the orcs attacked. I don't know if you guys know this, but from the old game, is it Battlefield Gothic, which was like ship-to-ship combat, the orcs had a ship that was just called the Rock, and it's literally just they strapped a rocket engine to a big asteroid and then threw it at somebody. So it's like, okay, is that what happened? Did something hit the Campanile, and now we're all just in disarray? And he's trying to come up with excuses as to why the word bearers are attacking them, and he's like, well, maybe they just got spooked and are firing wildly. And so he begins to radio Lorgar, who essentially clarifies, no, this is exactly what it looks like, and war begins. Now, of course, that is the opening fight over on the decks of the capital ships in orbit. But for everybody else, they need to piece this together on their own. We get a lot more detail on this specific aspect from the Black Library books versus the Forge World one. But if you were a soldier, from these ships but on ground, you would just have a very different perspective. Almost in unison, there's a cataclysmic explosion in the sky, and a battleship of the Ultramarines falls to the planet, wipes out tens of thousands. Not to mention that around you personally, gunfire is erupting everywhere, but there's no enemies that you see. All communication is down, save for a few like shortwave radios that are older than dirt. Again, that's the scrap code virus. But even if you somehow intuit that betrayal is upon you, anytime a meaningful band of Ultramarines gets together or form, a blast pierces down from orbit, and it just annihilates you. And that's because the word bearers have, in preparation for this, sent out raiding parties to take control of the orbital defense platform. Meaning all these giant lasers that are meant to take out huge ships from invading enemies, Xenos, that kind of stuff, are now pointing downward at the planet, annihilating any pockets of resistance. Within minutes, an obscene amount of the Ultramarines fleet is rendered nothing but a bunch of burning wrecks. Now, I want to kind of cover a little bit more about that, because it ends up being a very important plot point in some of the Black Library books regarding the orbital defense things, right? There were a lot of moving parts to this trap. One was that the ships entering the system were totally locked and loaded for war. And inside the launch bays of the word-bearer ships, they had Thunderbirds and assault claws, was filled with strike teams, boarding parties, all that kind of stuff. And Calth, as part of its defense network, had several hundred satellites that all had these big weapons platforms on them. One of them acted as sort of a main hub, like the computer they're behind, the brain, I should say, behind all these little satellites. But essentially, once things started, all of those claw pods were sent out to take as many of those satellites as possible, including the main hub for the computer. So while the traitors don't have every single one of the defense guns in their control, they have the main hub and many, many of the actual gun satellites. So the guns that were meant to keep Calth safe are now turning against it. Back on his flagship, Guilliman, after several minutes of barking orders, and he's trying to make contact with anyone, which he can't because of that Dark Mechanicum code. It's almost like comms are down, but selectively so. So, like, his general ability to talk to his troops is crippled, but he can try to send messages wherever he wants, and he keeps trying to send one over to Lorgar. Like, trying to regain, like, hey, stop this. What's going on? What are we doing? Eventually, he does manage to get him. Essentially, there's like a holodeck. Guilliman walks up and is like, what are you doing, dude? Like, please, stop the madness. Lorgar seems annoyed, dejected again. He's kind of there on the bridge in holographic form. And as he explains that, like, no, we're not going to talk anymore. This is it. We're enemies now. Lorgar begins to kind of change and mutate and twist. Like, his face gets all weird and he starts growing horns or whatever. And Guilliman at that point is like, he thinks it's a performative trick, with the display. And so he's like, cut the feed. We'll just try something else. We'll go back to just assuming these guys are enemies. But when they cut the feed, the hololithic creature is still there, and it turns out it was a demon sent over this somehow, which is a thing that the Ultramarines had never encountered in that capacity. Before Guilliman could react, like, he saw it and was like, oh god. Before he could do anything else, the demon explodes, collapsing the bridge of Macragge's Honor into the vacuum of space, with Reboot Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, flying out the window. This is sort of the first act of this battle. This is the all is lost moment. And so I want to transfer into why I think this story is cool. Calth captivates me in a way that nothing else does. I love the way the story starts, the mass confusion around. It makes it incredibly fun to read because all of the different accounts that you can get can all be accurate, but also wildly different because of the different types of atrocities that were happening on the ground and in space. And it's fun to read like a history book. It's also fun to read like a narrative. The scene of the Campanile lives rent-free in my head. I think about it whenever I think of the movie, I think it's Gravity with Sandra Bullock, I think. But basically the idea is like when something has enough inertia in space, everything is a bullet or a missile or whatever you want, and they just move with such force. Thinking about a ship with all the debris and all the junk on them, so like even just a tank inside of a ship then flying out the other side, it's just madness. And right from the start, this book solidifies for us as gamers, because of course the lore is fun, but being able to play it on the table is also a great part. There are no shortage of battle types here. You can have your zone mortalis while you're fighting inside a ship. Like, one is acting as a boarding party, the word bearers, to the ship's defenders. You could have any kind of battle on the ground. There's specific fights going on at spaceports, at munitions factories across the planet, like everything. And that to me is a sign of a good narrative book, when you can just drop your story in there and be like, where do we want to fight? There's tons of fronts. A lot of stuff was happening. That's when you know it's really enthralling. And at this point, the battle is up for the word bearers to lose. It's theirs if they want it. And we'll see how that pans out for them. So let me know your thoughts on this opening action here in the comments down below. I'd love to know what you think of the Betrayal on Calth. Again, go ahead and try to enter the Pop Goes the Monkey thing. I would love to see what armies are brought to life. I'm going to be doing a lore video on the winner as well. So show me what you got. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you in my next video. Happy wargaming, friends.